5 years ago, a newlywed couple disappeared during their honeymoon trek through the Swiss Alps, leaving behind only a cryptic final text message and vanishing without a trace despite extensive search efforts. Authorities eventually concluded they had fallen victim to the mountain's treacherous terrain, but with no bodies recovered, their families were left in agonizing limbo. Then one day, an amateur skier stumbled upon a camera frozen in glacial ice, a discovery that would unearth shocking evidence and reveal a conspiracy so intricate that it would change everything investigators thought they knew about the couples. Fate. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy mysteries like these, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that defy explanation. Emily Chen stared at the photograph in her hands, tracing the outline of her sister's smiling face with trembling fingers. The image showed Rebecca and her husband James on their wedding day, beaming with joy as they stood beneath an archway of white roses. 5 years had passed since they vanished in the Alps, yet the pain remained as sharp as ever. Outside her apartment window. Snow was beginning to fall, adding to the heaviness that always accompanied this particular date. December 15th, the anniversary of their disappearance. With a deep sigh, Emily placed the photograph back on her bedside table and reached for her phone. The screen displayed several missed calls from her mother and a text that simply read, "Call me when you're awake. I'm thinking of you today." Emily appreciated her mother's concern, but she wasn't ready to talk yet. These anniversary days followed. A pattern. First came the quiet reflection, then the crushing waves of grief, and finally, the reluctant acceptance that another year had passed without answers. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded to the kitchen to make coffee. The routine was familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. As the coffee brewed, filling her small apartment with its rich aroma, Emily's mind drifted back to the last conversation she'd had with Rebecca. "The views are absolutely breathtaking." Rebecca had gushed over their video call, her face glowing with excitement as she adjusted her camera to show the snow-capped mountains behind her. "James hired a local guide to take us off the regular tourist paths tomorrow. Apparently, there's this hidden glacier lake that hardly anyone visits in winter." Emily had felt a prickle of concern. "Isn't that dangerous? I thought the weather was supposed to turn." Rebecca had laughed, the sound slightly distorted by the poor connection. "Don't worry so much. Our guide, Marcel, knows these mountains like the back of his hand. Besides, James did all this research before booking. You know how thorough he is." That had been true. James Miller, Rebecca's husband of just 11 days, was meticulous in his planning. A structural engineer by profession, he approached their honeymoon with the same careful attention to detail that characterized his work. It made their disappearance all the more baffling. Emily's coffee machine beeped, pulling her back to the eye. Present. She poured herself a cup and walked to the living room, where a box labeled "Becca plus James" sat on the coffee table. She hadn't planned to go through it today, but something compelled her to lift the lid. Inside were newspaper clippings, printouts of emails from the Swiss police, and copies of the investigation reports she'd managed to obtain through persistent requests. The official conclusion was that Rebecca and James had ventured off-trail and fallen victim to an avalanche or crevasse. Their bodies, like many others claimed by the Alps, were presumed to be entombed in ice, perhaps never to be recovered. The local guide, Marcel Dubois, had reported them missing when they failed to return to their accommodation in the small village of Glacierdorf. According to his statement, he had advised against the trek due to deteriorating weather, but the couple had insisted. Emily had never fully accepted this explanation. The Marcel she'd heard about through Rebecca's enthusiastic descriptions didn't sound like someone who would bow to the wishes of inexperienced tourists if danger was imminent. And James, for all his sense of adventure, was not reckless. Something about the official story had never added up. The shrill ring of her phone interrupted her thoughts. It was her close friend and colleague, Dr. Nora Patel. "I know what day it is," Nora said when Emily answered. "I thought you might want some company." Emily felt a rush of gratitude. Nora was one of the few people who never treated the anniversary like something to be tiptoed around. "Actually, I would. Thanks, Nora. I'll bring lunch." "Give me an hour," Nora replied before hanging up. Emily used the time to shower and dress, trying to shake off the heaviness that clung to her. She had just finished tidying up when Nora arrived, carrying 2 bags of takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. "I got your usual," Nora said, placing the bags on the kitchen counter. She paused, noticing the open box in the living room. "Going through it all again?" Emily nodded, running a hand through her still damp hair. "I can't help it. Every year I think maybe I'll find something I missed before." Nora's expression softened. She was a radiologist at the same hospital where Emily worked as an emergency physician. They had met during Emily's residency, and Nora had been a steadfast presence through the nightmare of Rebecca and James's disappearance. "I understand," Nora said, opening containers of pad thai and green curry. "But you know what Dr. Mercer would say?" Emily managed a small smile. Dr. Mercer was the therapist she had seen for 2 years after Rebecca vanished. "That I'm trying to control the uncontrollable by searching for patterns in chaos." "Exactly." Nora handed her a plate. "And that healing doesn't mean forgetting." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle hum of the heating system, the only sound in the apartment. Emily appreciated Nora's presence. She didn't fill the air with platitudes or forced conversation, just sat with her in the weight of the day. After lunch, Nora helped Emily sort through some of the items in the box. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, organizing the documents, updating a timeline Emily had created, and discussing any new thoughts or theories. "Have you heard anything more from that journalist?" Nora asked, referring to Marcus. Weber, a Swiss reporter who had taken an interest in the case about a year after the disappearance. Emily shook her head. "Not since last spring. He said he'd reached a dead end with the guide, Marcel. Apparently he moved away from Gletscher shortly after the investigation concluded. No one seems to know where he went." Nora frowned, picking up a copy of the last text message Rebecca had sent. It was addressed to Emily. "Change of plans. Going higher than expected. Might lose signal for a day or 2. Don't worry. Love you, X." "This still bothers me," Nora said, tapping the paper. "It's so impersonal. Not like Rebecca at all." Emily had thought the same thing countless times. Her sister was effusive, especially in her messages to Emily. This text was stripped of all the exclamation points and emoji that typically punctuated Rebecca's communications. At the time, Emily had attributed it to poor reception or Rebecca being in a hurry, but now— "I know," she agreed. "And why would Marcel change their route to go higher if the weather was turning? It doesn't make sense." Nora opened her mouth to respond but was interrupted by the ping of Emily's email notification. Emily was about to ignore it when she noticed the sender's name. Marcus Weber. Her heart skipped a beat. "It's from Marcus," she said, quickly opening the email on her phone. As she read, her hand began to tremble so violently that Nora had to steady it. "Emily? What is it?" Emily looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Someone found a camera in the ice. They think it might be James's." Nora's expression shifted from concern to cautious hope. "Are they sure?" "No, but—" Emily scrolled through the email, her breath catching in her throat. "A skier found it embedded in a section of ice that recently broke away from a glacier. The memory card is damaged, but they're trying to recover the data. Marcus says the camera matches the description of the one James had with him, a high-end Canon he'd bought specifically for the honeymoon." Emily stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "I need to go there. I need to see it for myself." Nora placed a calming hand on her arm. "Slow down, Em. Let's think this through. Even if it is their camera, it doesn't necessarily mean—" They'll find them? I know, Emily said, her voice steadier than she felt. But it's the first new lead in 5 years, Nora. The first tangible connection to them since they vanished. I have to go. Nora studied her friend's face, then nodded. Okay, I'll help you make arrangements, but I'm coming with you. Emily felt a rush of gratitude. Thank you. I'll need to take emergency leave, and book flights, and contact Marcus directly. One step at a time, Nora advised, already pulling out her own phone. First, reply to Marcus and let him know you're coming. I'll look into flights. As Emily composed her response to the journalist, her mind raced with possibilities. What might the camera reveal? Could it finally provide answers to the questions that had haunted her for 5 years? She tried to temper her expectations, knowing that hope could be a dangerous thing after so much disappointment, but she couldn't help the flutter of anticipation in her chest. Within hours, their plans were set. They would fly to Zurich the next day, then take a train to the village nearest to where the camera had been found. Not Gletscher, but a smaller settlement called Eisendorf about 20 kilometers away. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying memories of Rebecca and James. The way Rebecca had called her immediately after James proposed, so excited she could barely form coherent sentences. How James had asked for Emily's blessing before buying the ring, nervous despite Emily's assurance that Rebecca would say yes. Their wedding, beautiful and intimate, with Rebecca radiant in their mother's restored vintage dress. And then, the silence. The agonizing wait as Swiss rescue teams searched the mountains, the gradual fading of hope as days stretched into weeks with no sign of them, the awful limbo of grief, without closure that had defined the past 5 years of Emily's life. As dawn broke, Emily finally drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of ice and mountains and a camera emerging from frozen depths, its secrets waiting to be revealed. The journey to Switzerland passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Emily barely registered the long flight, the train ride through stunning alpine scenery, or the winding drive up to Eisendorf in a rental car Nora had insisted on driving. Her focus remained fixed on the meeting ahead, with Marcus Weber and, more importantly, with the person who had found the camera. Eisendorf was smaller than Emily had expected, a cluster of traditional chalets nestled in a valley, their sloped roofs heavy with snow. The surrounding mountains loomed imposingly against the clear blue sky, beautiful but menacing in their vastness. As they drove through the village, Emily couldn't help but imagine Rebecca and James making a similar journey, excited and in love, unaware of what awaited them. Marcus had arranged to meet them at a small cafe in the center of the village. He was already there when they arrived, a man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood as they approached, extending his hand. "Dr. Chen," he said, his English carrying a slight German accent. "Thank you for coming so quickly. And this must be Dr. Patel." They exchanged greetings and sat down, the cafe quiet in the mid-afternoon lull. A waitress brought them coffee without being asked, suggesting this was a regular haunt for Marcus. "Appreciate you contacting me," Emily said, her hands wrapped around the warm mug to stop them from shaking. "Your email didn't include many details. What exactly was found, and who found it?" Marcus took a sip of his coffee before responding. The camera was discovered by a local ski instructor named Thomas Keller. He was exploring an area of the Steinggletscher, the Stone Glacier, that recently experienced a significant break due to unusual warming this season. The camera was embedded in a chunk of ice that had separated from the main glacier body. "And you believe it belonged to my sister and her husband?" Marcus nodded. "The model matches what was listed in their belongings, and the approximate location aligns with where they were believed to have been hiking. But more importantly," he hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Thomas recognized James from the photographs I published in my articles about the case. He says he met your brother-in-law briefly, the day before he and Rebecca disappeared. Emily felt her heart race. He met James? How? Where? At a local equipment shop in Gletscher. Thomas was working there part-time that season. He remembers James because they discussed camera equipment. Thomas is something of a photography enthusiast. Himself. Is he here? Can I speak with him? He'll join us shortly, Marcus assured her. He had a morning lesson to complete. Emily nodded, trying to process this information. What about the memory card? You mentioned it was damaged? Yes. The technical team at my newspaper is working on it. Ice can be remarkably preservative, but electronic components are delicate. They're optimistic about recovering at least some of the images. Nora, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. Mr. Weber, in your professional opinion, what does this discovery mean for the case? Could it lead to finding Rebecca and James? Marcus's expression grew serious. I don't want to give false hope, Dr. Patel. The Alps claim many lives, and not all bodies are recovered. But this camera is the first physical evidence linked to your sister and her husband since they disappeared. It could potentially show their last known location or conditions, which might help narrow the search area. Emily fought back tears. Even this small possibility felt momentous after years of nothing. The cafe door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and a young man stamping snow from his boots. He was tall and athletic, with tousled blonde hair and the ruddy complexion of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His eyes scanned the cafe before settling on their table. Thomas, Marcus called, waving him over. Thank you for coming. Thomas approached, his expression a mixture of curiosity and solemnity as he was introduced to Emily and Nora. When he shook Emily's hand, his grip was firm but gentle. I'm sorry about your sister and her husband, he said, his English excellent but accented. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Thank you for finding the camera, Emily replied, and for coming forward with it. They all sat down, and Thomas recounted how he had discovered the camera while exploring a newly accessible area of the glacier. I almost missed it, he admitted. Just a small dark shape in the bluish ice. I thought it might be a rock at first, but something made me take a closer look. When I realized what it was, I remembered the missing honeymoon couple from the articles Marcus had written. I contacted him immediately. Did you see anything else? Emily asked. Any personal items or... She couldn't bring herself to say remains. Thomas understood what she was asking. No, nothing else. But the area where I found it is extensive, and much of it is still inaccessible. The glacier has been receding at an accelerated rate this year, revealing areas that have been under ice for many years. I'd like to see it, Emily said decisively. The place where you found the camera. Thomas exchanged a glance with Marcus. It's not an easy hike, especially in current conditions, and there are restricted areas for safety reasons. I understand the risks, Emily insisted, but I need to see it for myself. After some discussion, Thomas agreed to take Emily and Nora to a safe vantage point the following day, from which they could view the area of the glacier where he had found the camera. It was the best compromise they could reach, given the dangerous terrain and Emily's lack of mountaineering experience. As they left the cafe, making plans to meet early the next morning, Emily felt a strange mixture of emotions, the familiar, grief, the new spark of hope, and underneath it all, a growing sense that there was more to this story than a tragic accident. The camera, frozen in time and ice for 5 years, might finally reveal what had happened to Rebecca and James on that mountain, and Emily was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Emily woke before dawn, her sleep disturbed by dreams of ice and distant voices calling for help. The small hotel room in Eisendorf felt unfamiliar in the pre-morning darkness, the heavy wooden furniture casting long shadows across the floor. She reached for her phone, checking the time, 4:47 a.m. Thomas wouldn't arrive to pick them up until 7, but Emily knew further sleep was impossible. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Nora in the adjacent twin bed, and made her way to the window. Pulling back the thick curtains revealed a world transformed by night. The village lights glowed softly against the snow, and beyond them, the massive silhouettes of the Alps loomed against a sky just beginning to lighten. Somewhere in those mountains, Rebecca and James had vanished, leaving behind questions that had haunted Emily for 5 years. The camera found frozen in the ice represented the first tangible connection to them since that final cryptic text message. Emily tried to temper her expectations, but couldn't help wondering what images might be recovered. Would they show Rebecca and James's final moments, evidence of what had really happened to them, or just innocent vacation photos, ending abruptly, before whatever tragedy befell them? Moving quietly to avoid disturbing Nora, Emily made coffee using the small machine provided by the hotel. The familiar ritual helped ground her as anticipation and anxiety threatened to overwhelm her thoughts. She cradled the warm cup between her hands and returned to the window, watching as the mountains gradually emerged from darkness, their snow-covered peaks catching the first hints of dawn. By the time Nora stirred an hour later, Emily had showered, dressed in the thermal layers recommended by Thomas, and packed a small backpack with essentials for their expedition. "You're up early," Nora observed, her voice still thick with sleep. She sat up, pushing her dark hair away from her face as she studied Emily with concern. "Did you sleep at all?" Emily shrugged. "A little. I kept thinking about the camera, about what we might learn today." Nora swung her legs over the side of the bed and reached for the second cup of coffee Emily had prepared. "Just remember what we discussed on the plane. We need to be prepared for all possibilities. The camera might reveal important information, or it might not. We can't pin everything on this one discovery." "I know," Emily acknowledged, though part of her couldn't help clinging to hope. "But it's the first real lead in years, Nora. I can feel it. This is different." Nora didn't argue further, instead focusing on getting ready for the day ahead. By the time a knock sounded at their door at precisely 7 a.m., both women were dressed in multiple layers, with sturdy hiking boots and the winter gear they'd purchased in the village the previous evening. Thomas stood in the hallway, dressed in professional mountaineering attire, his blonde hair tucked beneath a woolen cap. "Good morning," he greeted them, his breath visible in the cold corridor. "The conditions are good today, clear visibility and relatively mild temperatures. We should have no problem reaching the observation point." They followed him outside to a rugged 4-wheel-drive vehicle with a ski rack mounted on top. As they drove through the awakening village and up a winding mountain road, Thomas explained the plan for the day. "We'll park at the trailhead and hike for about 2 hours," he said, navigating a particularly steep turn with practiced ease. "The path is well maintained until the last half-kilometer, where it gets steeper. From the observation point, we'll have a clear view of the section of the Steinglacier where I found the camera." "How close can we get to the actual location?" Emily asked, watching the landscape transform as they gained elevation. The dense pine forests gave way to more open, snow-covered terrain, magnificent in its stark beauty. Thomas's expression grew more serious. "The exact spot is in a restricted area, part of the glacier that's actively shifting. It wouldn't be safe to approach it directly without professional equipment and training." Seeing Emily's disappointment, he added, "But we'll be close enough to get a good sense of the area, and I've marked the exact coordinates where I found the camera, which I can share with the search and rescue teams if necessary." They drove in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts as the landscape grew increasingly dramatic. Emily found herself scanning the pristine wilderness, trying to imagine Rebecca and James moving through this terrain, taking photographs, experiencing the majesty of the Alps during what should have been one of the happiest times of their lives. When they reached the trailhead, the sun had fully risen, bathing the snow-covered peaks in golden light. Thomas helped them check their gear one last time before leading them onto a path that wound upward through sparse trees and rocky outcroppings. This trail is popular with experienced hikers in summer, he explained, as they began their ascent. But in winter it's much less traveled. Watch your footing. The packed snow can be slippery in places. The hike was challenging, but not beyond Emily and Nora's capabilities. Both women were physically fit, though unaccustomed to the altitude, which made them stop more frequently to catch their breath. Thomas set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out features of interest: a distant waterfall frozen into fantastic ice formations, the tracks of mountain wildlife in the snow, the changing rock formations that told the geological history of the region. About an hour into their hike, they stopped at a natural plateau to rest and drink water. As they caught their breath, Thomas gestured toward a distant ridge. "The normal hiking route that tourists take runs along that ridge there," he said. "But according to the investigation, your sister and her husband were planning to go with their guide to a more remote area, a hidden glacial lake beyond that peak." He pointed to a jagged summit partially obscured by clouds. Emily followed his gaze, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "And the camera? Where exactly did you find it?" Thomas turned slightly, indicating a different direction. "In a section of the glacier that's about 3 kilometers from that lake, in a depression between 2 lesser peaks. It's unusual because it's not on any standard route. Recreational hikers wouldn't typically go there, especially in winter conditions." A frown creased Emily's brow. "That doesn't make sense. Why would they be in that area if they were heading to the lake?" Thomas shrugged. "That's what's puzzling. Either they got significantly off course, or they changed their destination. The area where I found the camera is technically challenging, not somewhere beginners would go without a very good reason." This new information troubled Emily deeply. It contradicted the narrative that had been presented by the authorities and by Marcel, the guide. According to his statement, they had set out for the glacial lake, but might have deviated slightly from the path due to weather conditions. Nothing in his account suggested they would have been anywhere near where the camera was discovered. As they resumed their hike, Emily's mind raced with questions. Had Marcel lied about their planned route? Had something caused them to drastically change course? Or was there some other explanation that she couldn't yet see? The trail grew steeper and more challenging as they continued, requiring their full attention. Loose rocks hidden beneath the snow created treacherous footing, and in some places, they had to use their hands to steady themselves against the rocky slope. Despite the physical demands, Emily pushed forward relentlessly, driven by a desperate need for answers. Finally, after navigating a particularly narrow section of the path, they emerged onto a broad outcropping of rock that formed a natural viewing platform. The sight before them was breathtaking. A vast expanse of glacier stretched below, its surface a mesmerizing pattern of blue-white ice, crevasses creating deep shadows across its face. Beyond it, mountains extended in all directions, their peaks piercing the sky like the spires of some colossal cathedral. "This is it," Thomas said, slightly breathless from the exertion. "From here, we can see the entire section of the glacier where the camera was found." Emily moved to the edge of the outcropping, her gaze intense as she studied the landscape. Thomas joined her, pointing to a specific area where the glacier's surface appeared disrupted, chunks of ice scattered across its face. "That's where the ice break occurred," he explained. "A section about the size of a small building separated from the main glacier body. I found the camera embedded in one of those chunks, about halfway down that slope." Emily nodded, trying to commit every detail to memory. "And there was nothing else? No other personal items or evidence?" Thomas shook his head. "Nothing I could see. But as I mentioned, the area is extensive and much of it remains inaccessible. The glacier has been retreating rapidly in recent years due to climate change, revealing things that have been encased in ice for decades. Nora, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. If the camera was in that location, it suggests Rebecca and James were there too, at some point. Does that help narrow down the search area for... She hesitated, not wanting to say bodies in front of Emily. Potentially, yes, Thomas replied, understanding her unspoken question. Though glacier movement complicates things, ice flows downhill, albeit very slowly. Over 5 years, objects embedded in the glacier could have moved some distance from where they originally entered the ice. Emily listened to this exchange with growing unease. The scientific discussion of glacier movement and how it might have transported her sister's body felt surreal, almost unbearable. Yet she forced herself to focus, to absorb the information that might lead to answers. So they could have been higher up originally? She asked, tracing the flow of the glacier with her eyes. Most likely, yes, Thomas confirmed. The camera probably entered the ice somewhere above the point where I found it. Emily turned to survey the surrounding peaks with renewed intensity. If Rebecca and James had been in this remote, technically challenging area, far from their reported destination, something significant had occurred to change their plans. The official explanation, that they had simply wandered off trail and fallen victim to the hazardous terrain, seemed increasingly implausible. As they stood on the outcropping, the sun climbed higher in the sky, causing the glacier below to glisten blindingly. Emily shielded her eyes, scanning the icy expanse as if she might spot some obvious clue that everyone had missed. The vastness of the landscape only emphasized how small and vulnerable 2 people would be in such an environment, and how difficult a thorough search would be. "I'd like to speak with Marcel," she said suddenly, turning to Thomas. The guide who was with them. "Do you know if he's still in the region?" Thomas and Nora exchanged a glance that Emily couldn't quite interpret. "Actually," Thomas said carefully, "Marcel Dubois left the area shortly after the investigation concluded. According to locals, he sold his guiding business and moved away. No one seems to know exactly where he went." "That seems convenient," Emily remarked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. Thomas nodded slowly. Many people thought so at the time, but the investigation cleared him of any wrongdoing. His statement was that he advised against the trek due to weather concerns, but your sister and her husband insisted. He claimed he gave them detailed maps and instructions before they set out alone. And people believed that? That an experienced guide would just let 2 novices go off into dangerous terrain against his advice? Emily's tone was incredulous. "Not everyone," Thomas admitted. "There were questions, especially from other guides in the region, but without evidence to contradict his statement." He trailed off with a shrug. The implications hung in the air between them. If Marcel had lied about the circumstances of Rebecca and James's disappearance, what else might he have concealed? And why? "We should document this view," Nora suggested, pulling out her phone to take photographs of the glacier and the surrounding terrain. "It might be helpful to have these images when we speak with the authorities." Emily nodded absently, her mind still working through the growing list of inconsistencies. The location of the camera, Marcel's hasty departure from the region, the impersonal final text message that hadn't sounded like Rebecca. Each piece felt significant, but she couldn't yet see how they fit together. They spent another hour at the observation point, with Thomas providing detailed information about the glacier and the surrounding mountains. He marked specific locations on a map he had brought, including the spot where he had found the camera and the approximate area where Rebecca and James had reportedly been heading. As the temperature began to drop and clouds gathered on the horizon, Thomas suggested they begin their descent before conditions deteriorated. Though reluctant to leave, Emily recognized the wisdom in his advice. They had gathered valuable information, and now she needed time to process it. The return journey was quicker, but required even more careful attention to footing, as the afternoon sun had softened the snow in places, making it treacherously slippery. By the time they reached the vehicle, Emily's muscles ached from the unaccustomed exertion, but her mind felt sharper, more focused than it had in years. As Thomas drove them back toward the village, Emily's phone signaled an incoming email. She pulled it out, her heart racing when she saw it was from Marcus Weber. "What is it?" Nora asked, noticing her reaction. Emily scanned the message quickly, then looked up, her expression a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "The technical team has recovered some images from the memory card," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus wants to meet us as soon as we get back to the village." Thomas accelerated slightly, sensing the urgency of the situation. The winding road descended through forests now cast in the golden light of late afternoon, the village appearing and disappearing from view as they rounded each curve. Emily clutched her phone, rereading Marcus's email as if it might contain additional details she had missed. What would the recovered images reveal? Evidence of what had really happened to Rebecca and James? Or simply more questions without answers? As the village grew closer, Emily steeled herself for whatever they might discover. After 5 years of uncertainty, she was finally on the verge of learning the truth, or at least part of it, about her sister's fate. And she was determined to follow this new lead wherever it might take her, no matter how difficult or dangerous the path might become. The village of Eisendorf felt unnaturally quiet as Thomas pulled the vehicle into a parking space near their hotel. Dusk was settling over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of purple and gold. Emily checked her watch. It was only 4:30 p.m., but at this time of year, darkness fell early in the Alps. The few tourists still on the streets were hurrying toward restaurants and hotels, eager to escape the rapidly dropping temperature. "Marcus said he'd meet us at the small cafe near the church," Emily told Thomas and Nora as they climbed out of the car. Her legs felt stiff from the hike, but anticipation overrode her physical discomfort. "He should be waiting for us now." The cafe was warmly lit, its windows glowing invitingly against the gathering darkness. Through the glass, Emily could see Marcus seated at a corner table, his laptop open in front of him. He looked up as they entered, raising a hand in greeting. "You made good time," he said as they approached, gesturing for them to sit. "How was the hike?" "Enlightening," Emily replied, unwilling to waste time on pleasantries. "You said you have images from the camera?" Marcus nodded, his expression guarded. "Some?" The memory card was significantly damaged by prolonged exposure to moisture, even within the ice. Our technical team managed to recover approximately 40% of the data. Emily felt her heart sink slightly at this news. Only 40%? What about the rest? Corrupted beyond recovery, unfortunately. But what we did retrieve is intriguing. Marcus turned his laptop so they could all see the screen. "These are organized chronologically, as best as our team could determine. The earliest images appear to be from the beginning of their honeymoon, arrival in Switzerland, their hotel, standard tourist locations." Emily leaned forward, her breath catching as photographs of Rebecca and James appeared on the screen. Her sister looked radiant, her dark hair contrasting with the snowy landscape, her smile wide and carefree as she posed beside James at various scenic overlooks. James looked equally happy, his arm often draped around Rebecca's shoulders, his expression that of a man who couldn't believe his good fortune. "These match the photos they sent me during the first few days of their trip," Emily confirmed, her voice tight with emotion. Seeing her sister and brother-in-law so alive, so vibrant, made their absence all the more painful. Marcus scrolled through several more images. Rebecca and James enjoying fondue at a restaurant, exploring a picturesque village, standing on the balcony of what Emily recognized as their hotel in Gletscher. Then came photos of their hiking preparations. James arranging equipment on a bed, Rebecca studying a map spread out on a table, both of them posing with their backpacks before setting out. "These must be from the morning of their disappearance," Emily said softly, studying each detail intently. Marcus nodded. "According to the timestamps, yes." The next series were taken on the trail. The subsequent images showed the progression of their hike, breathtaking vistas of mountains and valleys, close-ups of alpine flowers peeking through the snow, Rebecca standing on a rocky outcropping with her arms outstretched, as if embracing the vast landscape. In some photos, a third person was visible, a tall, bearded man who Emily assumed must be Marcel, their guide. "That's him? Marcel Dubois?" she asked, pointing to the figure. "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "You can see they were following a marked trail. Here, in these earlier shots." The photos continued, documenting their ascending journey. Emily noticed that the weather appeared to be clear and calm, contradicting Marcel's claim that conditions had been deteriorating. She pointed this out to the others. "These don't look like dangerous conditions to me," she said. "The sky is completely clear." Thomas leaned closer to the screen. "The weather in the Alps can change very quickly," he cautioned. "But you're right. There's no obvious sign of an approaching storm in these images." As Marcus continued scrolling, the terrain in the photographs became more rugged and remote. The marked trail was no longer visible. Instead, the trio appeared to be traversing virgin snow, with Marcel leading the way. In one image, Rebecca was looking back at the camera with an uncertain expression, very different from her earlier enthusiasm. "They're definitely off the standard path here," Thomas observed. "This terrain is more technical, not somewhere typically recommended for tourists, especially in winter conditions." Emily frowned, a sense of unease growing as she studied the changing dynamics captured in the photos. "Rebecca doesn't look happy. That's not like her, especially on their honeymoon." "Perhaps she was getting tired?" Nora suggested. They'd been hiking for several hours by this point, according to the timestamps. But Emily shook her head, knowing her sister's expressions too well. "No, she looks concerned, almost worried." The next few images showed a continued deviation from what Emily understood had been their planned route. Rather than heading toward a glacial lake, they appeared to be climbing higher, toward a forbidding ridge of bare rock and ice. Marcel was always ahead, occasionally turned back toward the camera, his face partially obscured by a scarf and sunglasses. Then came a series of photos that caused Emily to inhale sharply. They showed a small cabin or shelter nestled against a rocky outcropping, almost invisible against the landscape due to its weathered wooden exterior. "What is that place?" she asked, looking at Thomas. "You didn't mention any structures in that area." Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "Because there shouldn't be any. This region is protected parkland. Building private structures is prohibited." "Yet there it is," Marcus said, zooming in on the image. And based on the next photos, they went inside. The following images confirmed this, shots taken from inside the cabin showing a sparse but functional interior, a small wood-burning stove, basic furniture, shelves stocked with supplies. One photo showed James examining what appeared to be maps or documents spread across a rough wooden table. "This doesn't make any sense," Emily said, frustration evident in her voice. "Why would Marcel take them to a hidden cabin instead of the glacial lake they were supposed to visit? And why would he lie about it afterward?" No one had an immediate answer. Marcus continued to the next set of images, which were taken outside the cabin. They showed Marcel pointing toward a steep slope that disappeared into mist. Rebecca was shaking her head, her body language suggesting reluctance or disagreement. James stood between them, his expression unclear from the angle of the photo. "They appear to be having some kind of disagreement," Nora observed. "About where to go next, perhaps?" The next photo made Emily's blood run cold. It showed Rebecca standing alone, her expression now clearly one of alarm, her hand raised as if in protest or warning. It was the last clear image of her sister. The remaining photos were erratic, blurry shots of the ground, the sky, partial images of what might have been a struggle. The final photo was the most disturbing, a close-up of what appeared to be a small glass vial or ampule, its contents unknown. "What is that?" Emily demanded, pointing to the vial. Marcus shook his head, We're not sure. It could be medication, a water sample. Without context, it's difficult to determine. Emily sat back, her mind racing to process what she'd seen. The photographs told a story very different from the official account. Marcel had led Rebecca and James to a hidden, unauthorized cabin in a remote area, far from their stated destination. There had been some sort of disagreement or confrontation. And then, nothing. The erratic final images suggested a struggle or some kind of emergency, but provided no clear resolution. We need to take this to the police, Emily said firmly. These photos contradict Marcel's statement about what happened that day. Marcus nodded in agreement. I've already contacted Inspector Berger, who was involved in the original investigation. He wants to speak with you tomorrow morning. Emily turned to Thomas, her expression intense. The cabin, could you locate it? Based on these images? Is it still there? Thomas studied the photos carefully. Possibly. The surroundings are distinctive enough that I might be able to identify the general area. As for whether it's still there, he shrugged. That depends on how permanent the structure was. If it was well built, it could have withstood 5 years of alpine winters. I want to find it, Emily declared. That cabin is key to understanding what happened to Rebecca and James. It's where everything changed. Nora placed a cautioning hand on Emily's arm. We should talk to the police first, Em. If these photos suggest foul play, we need to let the authorities handle it. And if they don't take it seriously, or if they're too slow, Emily challenged. Marcel has had 5 years to cover his tracks. Who knows how much longer he'd have if the camera hadn't been found. The tension around the table was palpable as they debated the best course of action. Eventually, they reached a compromise. They would meet with Inspector Berger the following morning, present the recovered photographs, and urge an immediate investigation into the cabin and Marcel's whereabouts. Depending on the inspector's response, they would decide their next steps. As they left the cafe, the night had fully settled over Eisendorf. Stars glittered overhead, impossibly bright in the clear mountain air, and the snow-covered landscape seemed to glow with an ethereal blue light. Emily paused outside, gazing up at the looming mountains that had claimed her sister and brother-in-law. We're getting closer, Becca, she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I promise I won't stop until I know the truth. Back at the hotel, Emily found sleep impossible. She lay awake replaying the photographs in her mind, trying to construct a narrative that made sense of what she'd seen. Why had Marcel taken them to that cabin? What had happened there to cause the apparent conflict? And most importantly, what had become of Rebecca and James afterward? The official theory, that they had fallen victim to an avalanche or crevasse, now seemed not just unlikely, but deliberately misleading. Marcel had lied about their route and destination, then disappeared from the region shortly after the investigation concluded. These weren't the actions of an innocent man. Around 2 a.m., Emily gave up on sleep entirely. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Nora, and moved to the small desk by the window. Opening her laptop, she began a systematic search for any information she could find about Marcel Dubois. Most of the results were articles about Rebecca and James's disappearance, which mentioned Marcel only as the guide who had reported them missing. There were a few older pieces about his guiding business, accompanied by photographs of a ruggedly handsome man in his 30s with a neatly trimmed beard and confident smile. Nothing suggested anything suspicious about his background or reputation. Prior to the incident, Emily expanded her search, looking for any mention of Marcel in the years since the disappearance. This yielded even fewer results. It was as if he had simply vanished after selling his business and leaving Gletscher. On a hunch, she searched for information about unauthorized structures in the alpine parks, wondering if the mysterious cabin might have been documented elsewhere. This led her to articles about environmental protection efforts and occasional disputes over older buildings that predated the park designations, but nothing that seemed directly relevant to the cabin in the photographs. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Emily was about to close her laptop when she noticed an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, akelleralpenmail.ch. The subject line simply read, "About Marcel Dubois." Emily's heart raced as she opened the message. It was brief and cryptically worded. "I saw you in the village today with Thomas. I know you are looking into the disappearance of the American couple 5 years ago. I have information about Marcel Dubois that may help you. Meet me at the old clock tower at 7 a.m. if you want to know more. Come alone. Anton." Emily read the email twice, uncertain how to proceed. The instruction to come alone raised immediate red flags, yet the potential for new information about Marcel was too valuable to ignore. Anton Keller, was he related to Thomas? The similar surname suggested a possible connection, though Keller wasn't an uncommon name in the region. After careful consideration, Emily decided she would go to the meeting, but with precautions. She would tell Nora where she was going and arrange to call her at a specific time. If Nora didn't hear from her, she would alert Thomas and the authorities. With that decision made, Emily finally felt tired enough to attempt sleep again. As she drifted off, the images from the recovered photographs continued to play through her mind. Rebecca's worried expression, the mysterious cabin, the final blurry shots suggesting a struggle, and that strange glass vial. Somewhere in those fragments lay the truth about what had happened 5 years ago on that remote mountainside, and Emily was now more determined than ever to uncover it, no matter what dangers might lie ahead. The old clock tower stood at the edge of Eisendorf's central square, its weathered stone face illuminated by the first pale light of dawn. Emily arrived 10 minutes early, her breath forming clouds in the frigid morning air as she scanned the deserted plaza for any sign of Anton Keller. She had left Nora sleeping in their hotel room with a detailed note explaining where she'd gone, and instructing her to call Thomas if she hadn't returned or made contact by 8 a.m. The village was eerily quiet at this hour. Most businesses wouldn't open for at least another 2 hours, and even the bakery, typically the first establishment to show signs of life, remained dark. The only movement came from an elderly man clearing snow from the steps of the small church. Across the square, his methodical scraping the only sound breaking the silence. Emily positioned herself beside the clock tower, back against the stone wall to prevent anyone from approaching unseen. The mysterious email had left her both hopeful and wary. Information about Marcel could be crucial to understanding what had happened to Rebecca and James, but the sender's insistence that she come alone had triggered her instinctive caution. At precisely 7 a.m., the clock tower bells began to chime. The sound reverberated through the empty square, startling a cluster of birds from their perch on a nearby roof. As the final toll faded, a figure emerged from a narrow side street, moving with deliberate steps toward the tower. The man approaching was elderly, perhaps in his 70s, stooped slightly with age but moving with purpose. He wore a heavy wool coat and a traditional alpine hat, his weathered face partially obscured by a thick white mustache. As he drew nearer, Emily noticed his eyes, sharp and alert despite his age, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "Doctor." "Chen?" he inquired, his English heavily accented but clear. Emily nodded, maintaining a careful distance. "Mr. Keller? Anton Keller?" The old man inclined his head in confirmation. "Thank you for coming. It is not safe to talk here. Too many eyes, too many ears, even at this hour." He gestured toward the side street from which he had emerged. "My home is nearby. We can speak there." Emily hesitated, unwilling to follow a stranger to a second location. "I'm sorry, but I'd prefer to talk somewhere public. Perhaps the cafe when it opens?" Anton's bushy white eyebrows drew together in frustration. "The cafe is owned by Dieter Vogel, cousin to the mayor. Whatever is said there will reach official ears by noon." He must have sensed her continued reluctance, because his expression softened slightly. "I understand your caution, Dr. Chen. How about the church, then? It should be empty at this hour, and Father Matthias doesn't arrive until 8 for morning prayers." This seemed a reasonable compromise, and Emily agreed. They crossed the square together, their footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. The elderly man clearing the church steps nodded in recognition to Anton as they approached, exchanging a few words in rapid German before continuing his work. The church interior was dim and cool, illuminated only by the colored light filtering through the stained glass windows and a few votive candles flickering near the altar. The space smelled of old wood, incense, and the faint mustiness common to historic buildings. Anton led the way to a pew near the back, far from the entrance, and any windows that might allow someone to observe them. "I am sorry for the secrecy," he began once they were seated, his voice lowered to just above a whisper despite the empty church. "But what I know about Marcel Dubois is dangerous, to him and to anyone who threatens to expose him." Emily leaned forward, her heart racing. "You know what happened to my sister and her husband?" Anton shook his head slowly. "Not exactly. But I know that Marcel Dubois is not who he claimed to be, and that your sister and her husband were not his only victims." "Victims?" Emily repeated, the word sending a chill through her that had nothing to do with the unheated church. "You're saying Marcel deliberately harmed them?" "Marcel Dubois was not a legitimate guide," Anton stated flatly. "His credentials were falsified. His real name is Matthias Klein, and before coming to Switzerland, he operated in the French Alps, where at least 3 hikers disappeared under his guidance." Emily struggled to process this revelation. "How do you know this? And if it's true, why didn't the police uncover it during their investigation?" Anton's lined face creased further with a grim smile. "I know because I was a police detective in Chamonix for 30 years before retiring here. As for why the Swiss authorities didn't discover his true identity..." He shrugged. "Klein is clever. He changed enough details, used high-quality forged documents. And perhaps the investigation was not as thorough as it should have been. Eisendorf and Gletscher depend on tourism. A serial predator targeting hikers would be very bad for business." "A serial predator?" Emily echoed, the full implications beginning to sink in. "You think Marcel, Klein, is responsible for other disappearances?" Anton nodded gravely. "I believe so. When I moved here 4 years ago, I heard about your sister's case. Something in the details reminded me of unsolved disappearances from my time in Chamonix. I began looking into Dubois's background out of professional curiosity." He paused, his expression troubled. "What I found concerned me enough that I took my suspicions to Inspector Berger. But without hard evidence, he dismissed my theories as the overactive imagination of a retiree." "But now we have evidence," Emily insisted. "The camera shows that Marcel lied about where he took Rebecca and James. It shows a hidden cabin that shouldn't exist, and their final photos suggest some kind of confrontation. May I see these photos?" Emily hesitated briefly before pulling out her phone, where she had saved copies of the key images from the recovered memory card. She watched Anton's face carefully as he examined them, noting how his eyes narrowed at the images of the cabin and the final blurry shots. "This structure," he said, pointing to the cabin. "I know of it. The locals call it Die Geisterhütte, the ghost cabin. It has existed for decades, moving every few years." "Moving? How can a cabin move?" "It is dismantled and rebuilt. The park authorities find it, tear it down, and within months it reappears elsewhere. No one knows who maintains it or why. There are rumors, of course, smugglers perhaps, or someone hiding from the law." Emily considered this information, trying to connect it to what she already knew. "And you think Marcel, Klein, is connected to this cabin?" "I think," Anton said carefully, "that Klein used the cabin for his own purposes, and that those purposes may have led to your sister's disappearance." He gestured to one of the final photos. the blurry image of the glass vial. This concerns me most. It resembles containers used for certain powerful sedatives. The implication struck Emily like a physical blow. If Marcel had drugged Rebecca and James... She couldn't complete the thought, the possibilities too horrifying to contemplate. "We need to find him," she said, her voice hardening with determination. "Klein, or Dubois, or whatever his real name is." Anton nodded in agreement. "Yes," and quickly. Now that the camera has been found, he may already know that his secrets are in danger. "Do you have any idea where he might be now?" The old detective's expression grew thoughtful. "There have been rumors of someone matching his description working as a guide in the Italian Dolomites, using yet another name. But these are just rumors." "It's a start," Emily insisted. "More than we had before." Anton studied her face for a moment, seemingly weighing his next words carefully. "Dr. Chen, what I am about to suggest goes against my decades of police training. Normally, I would advise you to take this information to the authorities and let them handle the investigation." He paused, his weathered hands clasping and unclasping in evident internal conflict. "But I do not trust that Inspector Berger will act with the necessary urgency or discretion. Klein has powerful connections in this region. It is how he has evaded suspicion for so long." "What are you suggesting?" Emily asked, though she already sensed where this was leading. "I believe our best chance of finding the truth is to locate the cabin ourselves, before going to the authorities. The photographs from the camera provide enough visual cues that, combined with my knowledge of the region, we might be able to find it. If Klein has maintained his pattern, there may be evidence there that connects him to your sister's disappearance and perhaps to others." The church door creaked open, interrupting their conversation. Both Emily and Anton turned to see the elderly caretaker shuffling down the aisle, a ring of heavy keys jangling in his hand. "Father Matthias comes early today," Anton murmured, rising from the pew. "We should continue this discussion elsewhere." As they exited the church, the village was beginning to wake. Lights had appeared in windows, and the bakery was now open, the scent of fresh bread wafting across the square. Anton led Emily to a small park adjacent to the church, where stone benches surrounded a frozen fountain. "Your guide, Thomas Keller," Anton said as they sat on one of the benches. "Is he a relative of yours?" "No, we've never met before this trip. He's the ski instructor who found the camera in the glacier." Anton nodded thoughtfully. "He is my grandson, though we are not close. His mother, my daughter, married against my wishes and moved to another village. Thomas visits occasionally, but we do not discuss family matters." He paused, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Do you trust him?" The question caught Emily off guard. "I don't know him well enough to say. He's been helpful so far. Why? Do you have reason to distrust him?" "Not specifically. But in small villages like this, everyone is connected. Information travels quickly. If Thomas knows what we are planning, others may soon know as well." Emily considered this warning. She had shared details about the recovered photographs with Thomas, but not their plans to investigate further. Still, Anton's caution seemed warranted, given the sensitivity of the situation. "What do you suggest we do next?" she asked. "Meet me at my home this afternoon, after you've spoken with Inspector Berger. Bring your friend Dr. Patel if you wish. Having a witness may be wise, but no one else." He scribbled an address on a scrap of paper and pressed it into her hand. 3:00. We will make plans then." As Anton rose to leave, Emily caught his arm gently. "Why are you helping me? You didn't know Rebecca or James." The old detective's eyes softened, a flash of deep empathy visible beneath his gruff exterior. "Many years ago, my younger brother disappeared while hiking in these mountains. His body was never found. I know what it is to need answers, Dr. Chen. And I know what it is to be dismissed by those who should help you find them." With that, he nodded farewell and walked away, his stooped figure soon disappearing around a corner. Emily remained on. The bench, the paper with his address clutched in her hand, her mind racing with new possibilities and dangers. The meeting with Inspector Berger was scheduled for 10 a.m., just 3 hours away. She needed to return to the hotel, wake Nora, and prepare for what promised to be a pivotal confrontation with the local authorities. As she stood to leave, Emily noticed a figure watching her from across the square. Thomas Keller, his expression unreadable at this distance. How long had he been there? Had he seen her speaking with his grandfather? Uncertainty gnawed at her as she raised a hand in greeting. Thomas returned the gesture before turning and walking briskly in the direction of the ski slopes. Emily headed back to the hotel, her steps quickening as the implications of Anton's revelations sank in. Marcel Dubois, or Matthias Klein, wasn't just a guide who had made a fatal error of judgment. He was potentially a predator who had deliberately targeted Rebecca and James, and possibly others before them. The stakes had risen dramatically, as had the dangers of pursuing this investigation. But one thing was now abundantly clear. The official explanation for her sister's disappearance had been, at best, a grave mistake, and at worst, a deliberate cover-up. Whatever the truth might be, Emily was now more determined than ever to uncover it, to find out what had really happened in that hidden cabin 5 years ago, and to bring those responsible to justice, no matter the cost. The police station in Eisendorf occupied the ground floor of a traditional Alpine building near the village center, its official function betrayed only by a modest sign and the blue and white police vehicle parked outside. Emily and Nora arrived precisely at 10 a.m., having spent the morning reviewing the recovered photographs and preparing their approach for the meeting with Inspector Berger. "Remember," Nora cautioned as they climbed the steps to the entrance, "we're here to present evidence, not accusations. We need the police on our side." Emily nodded, though internally she remained skeptical about how seriously the local authorities would take their concerns. Anton's warning about potential cover-ups and Marcel's connections lingered in her mind, coloring her expectations of the meeting ahead. Inside, the station was unexpectedly modern, with sleek desks and computer terminals contrasting against the building's historic exterior. A young officer at the reception desk directed them to a conference room, where Marcus Weber was already waiting alongside a stern-looking man in his 50s, wearing a tailored suit rather than a uniform. "Dr. Chen, Dr. Patel," Marcus greeted, them rising from his chair. "This is Inspector Klaus Berger, head of the Regional Criminal Investigation Department." Berger shook their hands with efficient politeness, his grip firm, his expression revealing nothing. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs. His English was precise, accented but fluent. "Mr. Weber has shared with me that you have discovered new evidence regarding your sister's disappearance. I am very interested to hear what you have found." Emily settled into a chair, placing her laptop on the table. "Thank you for meeting with us, Inspector. As you know, a camera believed to belong to my brother-in-law was recently discovered in the Stein Glacier. The memory card contained photographs from the day Rebecca and James disappeared. These images directly contradict the official account of events provided by their guide, Marcel Dubois." Berger's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "Show me," he said simply. Emily opened her laptop and launched the presentation she had prepared, which included the most significant photographs along with timestamps and location notes provided by Thomas. As they progressed through the images, she highlighted the key discrepancies: the clear weather conditions contrary to Marcel's claim of deteriorating weather, the deviation from their reported destination, the mysterious cabin that should not exist, and the final images suggesting some form of confrontation. Berger studied each photograph carefully, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. When they reached the image of the vial, he leaned forward, his brow furrowing slightly. "This is concerning," he admitted, the first crack in his professional demeanor. If authentic, these photographs present a very different scenario than what was established in our original investigation. They're authentic, Marcus confirmed. Our technical team verified the metadata. These images were taken with James Miller's camera on the day of their disappearance. Berger sat back, his fingers steepled in thought. The cabin is particularly troubling. I am aware of rumors about such structures in the park, unauthorized shelters used occasionally by smugglers or others operating outside the law. But to have photographic evidence of Marcel Dubois leading tourists to one— He shook his head, clearly disturbed by the implication. There's more, Emily said, closing her laptop. I have reason to believe that Marcel Dubois is not who he claimed to be, that his real name is Matthias Klein, and that he has been linked to similar disappearances in the French Alps. At this, Berger's composure visibly faltered. That is a serious allegation, Dr. Chen. What is your source for this information? Emily hesitated, unsure whether to reveal Anton's involvement. She had promised to keep their meeting confidential, at least until they had explored the cabin. I'd prefer not to disclose my source at this time, she said finally. But I believe the information is credible enough to warrant investigation. Berger's expression hardened. I cannot pursue anonymous tips in an official capacity. If your source has relevant information, they must come forward formally. What about the photographic evidence? Nora interjected, sensing the rising tension. Surely that's enough to reopen the investigation. Yes, Berger conceded after a moment. The photographs justify further inquiry. I will assign officers to locate this cabin and to investigate Marcel Dubois' current whereabouts and background more thoroughly. He reached for a notepad, making several quick notations. However, I must ask you to leave this matter to the authorities from this point forward. Alpine investigations are dangerous, particularly for those without proper training and equipment. Emily nodded, though she had no intention of standing down, not after learning that Marcel might be a serial predator. Of course, Inspector. We appreciate your taking this seriously. When do you expect to begin the search for the cabin? Immediately, Berger assured her. I will contact the Park Service for assistance. They have detailed knowledge of the terrain and may already be aware of this unauthorized structure. The meeting concluded with promises of regular updates as the investigation progressed. Outside the police station, Emily checked her watch. It was just past 11:30 a.m., giving them plenty of time before their scheduled meeting with Anton at 3. You didn't tell him about Anton, Nora observed as they walked back toward their hotel. Or about our plans to find the cabin ourselves. No, Emily admitted. I'm not sure we can trust him completely. Anton seemed convinced that Berger might not act with urgency, or that information might leak to whoever Marcel has connections with. So we're really going to do this? Search for the cabin on our own? Nora's expression was concerned but not disapproving. She had been Emily's rock through the years of uncertainty following Rebecca's disappearance, always supportive even when she had doubts. Not entirely on our own. Anton knows these mountains, and he has investigative experience. We'll be careful. Emily squeezed her friend's arm gratefully. But I don't expect you to come along, Nora. This could be dangerous. And it's not your sister we're looking for. Nora's response was immediate and firm. Don't be ridiculous. I'm coming with you. Rebecca was like family to me too. You know that. The loyalty behind this declaration brought tears to Emily's eyes. Thank you, she said simply, knowing Nora would understand all the emotions contained in those two words. They spent the next few hours preparing for the expedition, purchasing additional supplies and warm clothing from the village shops. At 2:45 p.m., they set out for Anton's address, following the directions on the paper he had given Emily. The walk took them away from the tourist center to a quieter residential area where traditional chalets were set farther apart, many with small gardens now buried beneath snow. Anton's home was a modest wooden structure at the end of a narrow lane, smoke curling from its chimney against the afternoon sky. Emily knocked at the door, which opened almost immediately, as if the old detective had been watching for their arrival. "Come in quickly," he urged, ushering them inside. The interior was warm and simply furnished, with well-worn furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. A detailed topographical map was spread across a large table in the center of the main room, weighted down with various objects to keep it flat. "I've been studying the area based on the photographs," Anton explained, leading them to the map. "Using landmarks visible in the background and my knowledge of the region, I believe the cabin is located here." He pointed to a section of the map marked with red pencil, a remote area between two lesser peaks. "That's at least 15 kilometers. From where Thomas found the camera," Emily noted, tracing the distance with her finger. "Yes, but consistent with glacier movement over 5 years," Anton confirmed. "If your sister and her husband were in that location when something happened to them, their belongings could have been transported downslope by the glacier's natural flow." Nora studied the map with a physician's analytical eye. "That's extremely remote terrain. How difficult would it be to reach that location?" "Challenging but not impossible," Anton replied. "I've marked a route that avoids the most dangerous areas. With proper equipment and preparation, we could reach it in a day's hike." "We?" Emily questioned, surprised that the elderly man was planning to accompany them. Anton straightened, a flash of pride crossing his weathered features. "I may be retired, but I still know these mountains better than most, and my experience as a detective could prove valuable if we find evidence at the site." Their planning session was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Anton motioned for them to remain quiet as he moved to a window, cautiously peering through. "The curtains." His posture relaxed slightly. "It's Thomas," he said, though his tone remained guarded. "I did not invite him." "I mentioned our meeting with Inspector Berger to him this morning," Emily admitted. "But not our plans to meet you." Anton frowned but moved to open the door. Thomas stood on the threshold, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "I went to the police station after you left," he explained without preamble. "Berger told me about the photographs and that they're organizing a search for the cabin. I want to help." Anton studied his grandson with wary eyes. "Why?" "Because I found the camera. Because I feel responsible for what happens next." Thomas hesitated, then added more quietly, "And because you're my grandfather, and I know you well enough to guess you're planning something outside official channels." A tense silence followed this declaration, broken eventually by Anton's reluctant sigh. "Come in then, but understand that what we discuss here stays between us." Thomas nodded solemnly, stepping inside and removing his snow-covered boots at the door. As Anton closed the door behind him, Emily noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a new layer of complexity added to their already precarious alliance. The expanded group resumed planning, with Thomas providing valuable insights about current conditions in the higher elevations and the equipment they would need. Despite his unexpected arrival, his expertise as a mountain guide was undeniable, and even Anton grudgingly acknowledged the advantages of having him join their expedition. By the time darkness fell outside, they had formulated a detailed plan. They would set out before dawn the next morning, using Thomas's four-wheel drive vehicle to reach an access point where they could begin their hike. Anton had arranged for specialized equipment, ice axes, crampons, avalanche beacons, to be delivered to his home that evening. If all went well, they would reach the probable location of the cabin by mid-afternoon, document whatever they found, and return before nightfall. "We should get some rest," Anton advised as they concluded their preparations. "Tomorrow will be physically demanding, especially for me." He managed a wry smile at this acknowledgement of his age. "Meet back here at 4 a.m., dress warmly in layers, and bring only what is essential." As Emily and Nora prepared to leave, Thomas approached Emily privately. "There's something you should know," he said, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "Inspector," Berger called the park service after your meeting, but he's delayed the official search until the day after tomorrow, claiming personnel shortages. Emily felt a surge of vindication at this news. Anton had been right to be skeptical of Berger's commitment to immediate action. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Does he know we're planning our own search?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't think so, but word travels fast here. We should assume our movements are being watched." This warning accompanied Emily and Nora back to their hotel, adding a layer of paranoia to their final preparations. They packed their bags methodically, speaking little, each lost in thoughts of what the next day might bring. The knowledge that they were potentially operating against the wishes of local authorities, and possibly under scrutiny, lent a clandestine air to their actions. Sleep came fitfully for Emily that night. Her dreams were a chaotic blend of images. Rebecca's worried face from the photographs, the mysterious cabin emerging from swirling snow, a glass vial with unknown contents. She woke repeatedly, checking the time, anxious not to oversleep for their 4 a.m. rendezvous. When her alarm finally sounded at 3:15 a.m., Emily was already awake, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. She rose silently, dressed in the layers they had prepared, and gently woke Nora. They moved through their final preparations with minimal conversation, both understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. The village was still shrouded in darkness as they made their way to Anton's house, the wow, snow crunching beneath their boots, the only sound breaking the pre-dawn silence. Thomas's vehicle was already parked outside, loaded with equipment. Anton greeted them at the door, dressed in professional mountaineering gear that seemed at odds with his age, but perfectly aligned with his determined expression. "Everything is ready," he said, handing them each a small pack containing emergency supplies. "Let's go." As they loaded into Thomas's vehicle and began the journey out of Eisendorf, Emily gazed back at the sleeping village, its buildings mere silhouettes against the lightening sky. Somewhere in the remote wilderness, they were heading toward Ley, answers about Rebecca and James's fate, answers that had remained hidden for 5 years, preserved like the camera in ice, waiting to be discovered. The drive took them through winding mountain roads, climbing steadily higher as dawn began to break. Thomas navigated the increasingly treacherous terrain with practiced skill, eventually bringing them to a small clearing that served as the trailhead for their expedition. "From here, we go on foot," he announced, securing the vehicle and distributing the heavier equipment among them, taking care to give Anton the lightest load despite the older man's protests. The hike began in silence, each focused on the physical demands of traversing the snow-covered path. As the sun finally crested the eastern peaks, illuminating the landscape in golden light, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were finally taking action, moving toward answers rather than waiting passively for others to find them. The terrain grew more challenging as they ascended, requiring the use of their specialized equipment to navigate icy slopes and narrow ridges. Thomas led the way, occasionally stopping to consult the GPS coordinates they had extrapolated from the photographs. Anton followed, his pace steady if somewhat slower than the others, his face betraying no sign of strain despite the arduous journey. Nora stayed close to Emily, the two women supporting each other through particularly difficult sections. By mid-morning, they had reached a high plateau that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding mountains. Thomas called for a brief rest, distributing water and energy bars from his pack. "We're making good time," he reported, checking his GPS device. "Another 3 kilometers to the target area, but the terrain gets more technical from here." As they prepared to continue, a distant sound caught their attention, the rhythmic thudding of helicopter rotors echoing among the peaks. They watched, as a small aircraft appeared from behind a mountain, circling an area to the northeast of their position. "Police helicopter," Anton observed grimly. "It seems Inspector Berger decided not to wait after all." "Or someone tipped him off about our expedition," Thomas added, his expression troubled. Emily felt a mixture of relief and frustration at this development, While additional resources searching for the cabin increased the chances of finding it, she had hoped to be the first to discover whatever evidence it might contain. "We should keep moving," she urged. "We still have a head start on any ground teams they might deploy." The next phase of their journey proved even more demanding, requiring careful navigation of unstable rock formations partially hidden beneath snow. Progress slowed considerably as safety became their primary concern. The helicopter continued its distant patrol, occasionally disappearing behind ridges only to reappear minutes later, its persistent presence a reminder of the race they were now engaged in. It was early afternoon when Thomas suddenly raised his hand, signaling for them to stop. They had reached a narrow ledge overlooking a small valley nestled between two stark rock faces. "There," he said quietly, pointing to a structure, partially visible among a cluster of wind-stunted pines. "I think that's it." The cabin matched the one from the photographs, a simple wooden structure built against the natural shelter of a rock wall, its weathered exterior blending with the surrounding landscape. From their elevated position, they could see no signs of recent activity, no smoke from the chimney, no tracks in the snow surrounding it. "How do we approach?" Emily asked, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Carefully," Anton replied, scanning the area with the practiced eye of a veteran detective. "We should circle around, approach from downwind in case someone is inside. Thomas, you take the lead. Dr. Patel and I will stay with Emily." Thomas nodded, unstrapping his ice axe and securing it within easy reach as a precaution. They descended into the valley with meticulous care, using the sparse tree cover for concealment where possible. As they drew closer to the cabin, its abandoned appearance became more evident. Snow had accumulated against the door, undisturbed, and one of the shutters hung askew from a single hinge. "No one has been here recently," Anton confirmed in a whisper when they paused behind a large boulder about 50 meters from the structure. "But we should still exercise caution." Thomas approached the cabin first, moving with the silent precision of someone accustomed to traversing treacherous terrain. He circled the perimeter once before signaling that it appeared safe. The others joined him at the entrance, where a heavy wooden door was secured with a simple padlock. "Stand back," Anton instructed, producing a small tool from his pocket. With surprising dexterity for his age, he manipulated the lock until it clicked open. "Old habits," he explained with a grim smile at their surprised expressions. The door creaked open to reveal an interior much like the one shown in the recovered photographs, though dust and cobwebs now covered most surfaces. A table stood in the center, shelves lined the walls, and a small wood stove occupied one corner. Everything was coated in a layer of undisturbed dust. "No one has been here in years," Nora observed, running a finger across the table surface and examining the thick dust that came away on her fingertip. Emily moved slowly through the space, her eyes scanning for anything that might connect to Rebecca and James. The cabin was sparsely furnished, but appeared to have been equipped for extended stays. Preserved food still lined some of the shelves, and basic cooking utensils hung from hooks on the wall. "Look for anything out of place," Anton advised. "Something that doesn't belong in a mountain shelter. And take photographs of everything before we touch it." They spread out, each taking a section of the cabin to examine methodically. Emily found herself drawn to a small desk against the far wall, its surface cluttered with papers covered in dust. As she carefully moved aside the top layer, her breath caught in her throat. "I found something," she called, her voice tight with emotion. The others gathered around as she gently lifted a leather-bound journal from beneath the scattered papers. The initials RC were embossed on the cover, Rebecca Chen, her maiden name, which she sometimes still used professionally. With trembling hands, Emily opened the journal. The first several pages contained Rebecca's familiar handwriting, notes about their honeymoon, observations about the landscapes they'd visited, sketches of alpine flowers. But the final entry, dated the day of their disappearance, was different. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic, Something is wrong. Marcel isn't taking us to the lake. He brought us to this cabin instead, saying it's to wait out a storm, but the sky is clear. He's been making private calls when he thinks we aren't listening. James tried to leave, saying we should return to the village, but Marcel became aggressive. He has a gun. James is trying to reason with him now, but I'm afraid. If anything happens to us, know that Marcel Dubois is responsible. He's not who he claims to be. Emily's voice broke as she read the final words aloud. The stark confirmation of their suspicions that Marcel had deliberately led Rebecca and James to the cabin with harmful intent was both vindicating and devastating. "There's more," Thomas said, calling their attention to a loose floorboard he had discovered near the stove. Carefully prying it up, he revealed a small cache of items: a handgun, several passports with different names but the same photograph of Marcel, and a collection of personal items that appeared to have been taken from victims: watches, jewelry, wallets. Anton examined the passports with a grim expression. Matthias Klein, Stefan Müller, Marcel Dubois, multiple identities, just as I suspected. This man has been operating across borders for years. But Emily's attention had been captured by something else in the hidden compartment, a silver charm bracelet with a distinctive mountain-shaped pendant. "This was Rebecca's," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I gave it to her as a wedding gift." The discovery of Rebecca's bracelet amid what appeared to be trophies from multiple victims confirmed their worst fears. Marcel Dubois, or whatever his real name might be, had not just been a guide who made a fatal error. He was a predator who had deliberately targeted tourists, including Rebecca and James. "We need to document everything and alert the authorities," Anton decided, already taking photographs with a small camera he had brought. "This is evidence of multiple crimes." As they carefully cataloged the contents of the cabin, the sound of the helicopter grew louder, suggesting it was now circling closer to their location. Through the single grimy window, Emily could see it hovering above the valley, presumably having detected their tracks in the snow. "They've found us," Thomas reported. "We should prepare to explain our presence here to Inspector Berger." But Emily's attention had been drawn to something else: a door at the rear of the cabin that they had initially assumed led to a storage area. Unlike the rest of the cabin, the dust around its handle appeared disturbed. "Someone's been here more recently," she said, pointing out the anomaly to the others. "This door has been used." Anton moved to the door, examining it carefully before attempting to open it. It wasn't locked, swinging inward to reveal a short tunnel carved into the rock face against which the cabin was built. The tunnel extended about 20 meters before opening into a small natural cave. The scene inside the cave struck Emily with horror and nausea. The space had apparently been used as a makeshift disposal site. Human remains were visible, partial skeletons, some still with fragments of clothing attached. A systematic arrangement suggested this was not a natural burial, but a deliberate collection. "My God," Nora breathed, her medical training allowing her to quickly assess what they were seeing. "There are at least 4 distinct individuals here." Anton pulled Emily back gently. "You shouldn't see this," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. But Emily refused to look away, scanning the grim scene for anything that might identify Rebecca or James. A flash of color caught her eye, fabric preserved in the cave's cool, dry conditions. Moving closer, she recognized the distinctive pattern of the scarf Rebecca had been wearing in the last photographs, still loosely wrapped around one of the sets of remains. "It's her," Emily whispered, tears flowing freely now. "We found her, Nora. We found Rebecca." The moment of discovery, the culmination of 5 years of searching and wondering, was interrupted by voices calling from outside the cabin. Inspector Berger and several officers had arrived, guided by the helicopter that now hovered directly overhead. The next hours passed in a blur of official activity. The cabin and cave were secured as a crime scene, with forensic technicians carefully documenting and collecting evidence. Emily, Nora, Thomas, and Anton were separated for questioning, each providing their account of how they had discovered the location and what they had found inside. To Emily's surprise, Inspector Berger was not angry about their unauthorized expedition. The significance of their discovery, evidence linking Marcel Dubois to multiple disappearances, overshadowed any procedural violations. "You were right to be skeptical of our commitment," Berger admitted to Emily when they finally had a moment to speak privately. "There have been pressures to keep certain aspects of tourism-related incidents minimal. But this," he gestured toward the cabin, "this cannot be minimized or ignored. This man is a serial killer who has operated in our region for years. Finding him is now our highest priority." As evening approached, Emily stood at the edge of the valley, watching as the authorities continued their meticulous work. Nora joined her, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Nora asked gently. Emily considered the question, sorting through the complex emotions of the day. "Not yet," she answered honestly. "But I will be. We found her, Nora. After all this time, we can bring her home." 3 days later, Emily stood in the small cemetery in Eisendorf, watching as the recovered remains of Rebecca and James were prepared for transport back to the United States. Forensic examination had confirmed their identities and established that both had died from gunshot wounds to the head. A quick death, at least, though that provided little comfort. Anton, Thomas, and Nora stood beside her, a small circle of support in the face of renewed grief. The discovery had brought closure, but also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. "The investigation is expanding," Anton informed her quietly. "Authorities in Switzerland, France, and Italy are cooperating to identify the other victims and to locate Marcel, or whatever his real name might be. His photograph has been distributed to border checkpoints and police stations across Europe." Emily nodded, grateful for the information, but finding it difficult to care about Marcel's eventual capture now that she had achieved her primary goal, finding Rebecca and bringing her home. Justice was important, but it wouldn't bring her sister back. As they left the cemetery, Emily paused to take one last look at the magnificent mountains that had claimed her sister's life. They remained as they had been for millennia, beautiful, impassive, indifferent to human tragedy. Yet they had also, in their way, preserved the truth. The glacier's slow movement had carried James's camera downslope, eventually revealing it, at precisely the moment when Thomas happened to be exploring that section of ice. "Some might call that coincidence," Nora commented, following Emily's gaze to the peaks. "I prefer to think it was Rebecca, finding a way to tell her story after all this time." Emily smiled at the thought, finding unexpected comfort in the notion. She had come to Switzerland seeking answers about her sister's disappearance, and had found them, though not in the way she had expected. The journey had been painful but necessary, leading to a truth that would allow her, and Rebecca's memory, to finally move forward. The mystery of the honeymoon couple who vanished in the Alps had been solved, revealing a darker story than anyone had imagined. But in that darkness, Emily had also discovered remarkable human connections. Anton's empathy born from his own loss, Thomas's commitment to the truth, Nora's unwavering friendship, and ultimately, the enduring bond with her sister that had transcended even death. As they boarded the train that would begin their journey home, Emily silently promised Rebecca that her story would be told, that her final brave act of documenting what was happening in that journal would help ensure that Marcel's other victims would also receive justice and closure. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary tales of mystery, perseverance, and the human determination to uncover truth against all odds. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a seemingly random discovery that led to unexpected answers? What mysteries in your own life would you go to the ends of the earth to solve?